everybody, episode 778 of the podcast. It is Super America, the Outdoor Sports Podcast. It is Tuesday, October 10th, 2023. Peep, I hope everybody's doing well. I hope everybody is having a great day. And how about this? Do not check your speakers. You've got yourself a bonus Tuesday quick hit episode of the Aaron Torres Sports Podcast. Here is what you need to know about today's show. The reason we're doing this show. We got a big piece of news on Monday, as just when you thought conference realignment was over, it's back like it never left, baby. That is right. Gonzaga is now flirting again with the Big 12. We thought realignment was done, but now Gonzaga, a potential member of the Big 12. We're going to explain why this has started again, what it means, break it down from all angles. Before we get to Gonzaga, we do have an announcement. And it is the announcement that you have heard so many times over the last couple weeks, and that is this. With legal sports betting now in the state of Kentucky, I am proud to announce that the Aaron Torres Pod, YouTube, all that good stuff, we have partnered with DraftKings Sportsbook and the DraftKings Sportsbook app to celebrate the launch of sports betting in the state of Kentucky. And here is the best part. Our partners, DraftKings, they've got an incredible offer for first-time users of the DraftKings Sportsbook and the DraftKings Sportsbook app, exclusive to listeners of the Aaron Torres Pod. What is that offer, you ask? You're probably wondering. Well, here it is. You can bet $5 on any game. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, bet $5 on any game, and you get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you use the promo code Torres. That's right. All you got to do, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code Torres. That's Torres, Torres. And when you bet $5 on any game, pro football, college football, baseball's going on right now, you get $200 in bonus bets instantly for first-time customers only. Thank you again to DraftKings Sportsbook. So fired up to be working with DraftKings. With that said, there is no more time to waste, so let's get to the topic of the day with this bonus episode of the Aaron Torres Pod. And the topic of the day is pretty straightforward. It is that just when you thought conference realignment was dead, it's back, baby. It's like the Undertaker gif on social media. You think the Undertaker's dead, the coffin pops up, the hand pops out, and we are back in business with conference realignment. After a crazy summer that saw the four quarter schools, Colorado, Arizona State, and Utah to the Big 12, Oregon and Washington to the Big 10. And oh, by the way, Stanford, Cal, and yes, SMU to the ACC. The latest twist is that Gonzaga has reignited, whatever you want to call it, negotiations, conversations with the Big 12 to join that league. That report came on Monday morning via Seth Davis. You all know Seth Davis via the Messenger. Used to work at The Athletic, does work for CBS Sports. Seth Davis with the initial report there. And so there's a lot of kind of stuff that's got to get through, and there's hoops that's got to get jumped through and all that. But essentially, I know what many of you are probably thinking. You're probably thinking a couple things. One, Torres, didn't the Big 12 commissioner say that conference realignment was done, that his conference wasn't taking any other schools? Hasn't Gonzaga been flirting with them forever? I thought we were past this. Like, why is this coming up now? So what I want to do is kind of give you a quick refresher of the relationship between Gonzaga and the Big 12, and then get into, does it make sense? Does it not make sense? What's realistic and what isn't? Now, in terms of the history, it really actually goes back to a little over a year ago. We know the context, right? Texas and Oklahoma are headed to the SEC. That's done. USC and UCLA are headed to the Big 10. And beyond that, the Big 12 has this new hotshot swashbuckling commissioner named Brett Yormark, who came from Rock Nation, a big agency in New York City, to take over the Big 12. And when he took over last year, his first day was July 1st, which was the day after USC and UCLA left for the Big 10. He went to his first Big 12 media days and he said, we are open for business. We plan to expand. Now, keep in mind, the Big 12 was already adding the 4 schools they added this year, UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, and Houston. But he said, we want more. We want a bigger cut of the pie. We're going big. Go big or go home, right? And so over the course of probably 6 to 8 months, you started to figure out what the Big 12's plan was. And first of all, I should mention that it was about a year ago that the first rumors of the Gonzaga relationship began. If I remember, I know this for a fact because I remember talking about it at the time. But a little over a year ago, or right around a year ago, Gonzaga basketball had a preseason exhibition against Tennessee in the state of Texas. At the time, Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12 offices are in the city of Dallas, essentially announced, like a report came out that when Gonzaga was in town for that game, they met with Brett Yormark, the school president, the AD, whatever. And then from there, as the point I was trying to get to, we started to see what the Big 12's plan for conference expansion was. And we talked about it a lot on this show. But the plan for expansion, I can tell you, UConn was involved. So, between UConn and other places that I have contacts, I have a pretty good feel for it. But essentially, the Big 12, they really felt like, okay, we feel pretty good that Colorado is ready to jump ship from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. We're at 12 schools now. Colorado will be number 13. But if Colorado leaves, there's no guarantee that anybody else in the Pac-12 will. At the time, Oregon and Washington had no offer from the Big Ten. And if Oregon and Washington were staying, it probably meant that Arizona State and Utah were staying. And if Arizona State was staying, then Arizona kind of had to stay. And so the plan from the Big 12 was straightforward. Get Colorado for football. And then the focus becomes, let's make the best basketball conference that has ever existed. Because essentially, as I told you, the thought process was pretty straightforward. We'll never catch the SEC in football. We'll never catch the Big Ten in football. But if those two conferences, they try to break off, they try to do their own thing, they try to do whatever, you can't have college basketball without Kansas and Baylor and Kansas State and Iowa State. Now let's go get some other brands to back it up. And so there was a lot of talk about UConn. There's a lot of talk about Gonzaga, a lot of talk about San Diego State. And oh, by the way, I think they wanted Arizona, but Arizona's kind of tied to Arizona State, whatever. And so that was the plan. And then a couple things happened. One, the Big Ten presidents met in May. Their Big 12 presidents met in May. And you could kind of tell after those conversations, didn't really feel like they were all that keen on going the basketball route. They wanted big schools, football schools, big brands, whatever. You could argue Gonzaga and UConn are mega brands in basketball, but it was clear that they weren't as keen on the basketball vision that Brett Yormark was proposing. But then the real thing that happened was they got Colorado as planned, and then the Pac-12 fell apart. Again, nobody could have envisioned a world where Oregon and Washington got an offer from the Big Ten, but they did. And so once that happened, the Pac-12 disintegrated. Arizona State, and Utah joined Colorado in the Big 12. And at that point, and this is where it gets interesting, Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12, said, we are done with expansion. We got the schools we wanted. We didn't think they were going to be there. They were. And so now, we're done. Everything's done. We're finished, whatever. So that was what got us to this point. That was where the Gonzaga flirtation started. That's where we are now. The question becomes, why did this start again right now? Well, the reason is, as it always is, the reason this started up again is because of a little thing called money. I'm doing, for people who aren't watching on YouTube, if you're listening on podcast, I'm doing the Johnny Manziel money sign, okay? What changed is the whole structure of expansion and realignment has changed in college sports. And it changed with the idea that all of these schools, some of them are willing to take less money to join a conference that stabilizes them. It started really with Oregon and Washington. We know that they're not getting the same share as Purdue and Indiana and Ohio State and Michigan. But then the real interesting one was Cal and Stanford basically punted on any type of future, basically saying, we'll take whatever we can. We're going to go to the ACC and we'll take less money, eventually get a full share. And SMU basically bought their way into the ACC. SMU, remember, is taking no TV money from the ACC for a finite, I think it's 7 years, to make sure that they get their spot at the table with the big boys. And so essentially what it's like a parent buying their kid into a school that they wouldn't otherwise get into. I'm not going to say whether SMU, Cal, Stanford are qualified or not, but they wouldn't have gotten into the ACC unless they took less money. And so where this conversation started with Big 12 and Gonzaga is that we found out that Gonzaga is now willing to take less money to potentially join the Big 12, which brings us to the report on Monday from Seth Davis. And so when I hear that, what it seems to me is pretty obvious. Gonzaga is ready to make the move. Will the Big 12 follow suit? And what was interesting about the Seth Davis report, Seth Davis basically said that when Brett Yormark even brought this up to his school presidents, they were surprised. They thought realignment was done, expansion was done, whatever. So they kind of have a lot to feel. Now, in terms of the why and why not, it's pretty straightforward, right? Why you do it? It's because Gonzaga is a mega basketball brand. And you can sit there and say, oh, they haven't won a championship, and they haven't this and they haven't that. The bottom line is they move the needle, they draw eyeballs. You can argue, not whatever. But Dennis Dodd from CBS put out an interesting report on Monday morning that basically said that from a TV engagement perspective, Gonzaga is one of the top 5 biggest brands in the sport, behind only Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, and Kansas. Everybody else is behind Gonzaga, whether it's UCLA, Michigan State, Louisville, Arizona, UConn, whatever. So they're a mega brand. And there's no doubt that in this moment, they absolutely help your basketball product. Again, think about what the Big 12 already is in basketball. Kansas, Kansas State, Iowa State, Baylor. Think about the fact that they're adding Houston, a top 10 program over the last probably 5 or 6 years. Cincinnati's historically good. BYU's historically good. They're in the Big 12 now. And then remember, they're adding Arizona next year, which is a mega brand as well. So if you can add Gonzaga to that, whoo, that's a big, big, big deal. And it's an even bigger deal when you consider that, again, they are willing to take less money. Now, the question becomes, is there any hiccups, any holdups? The only thing that I have really seen, and Seth Davis did report this part, is essentially the idea that basically the Big 12 presidents, I think, have questions, right? One, do we want a basketball only school? Remember, when the whole conversation began, when this all started 6-8 months ago, they wanted big brands, football only. They don't want basketball only. That's why Gonzaga wasn't interesting to them. San Diego State wasn't interesting to them. UConn is obviously a football playing school. I talk about UConn football too much on this show, but they only wanted football schools. So do you want a basketball school? Do you want Gonzaga? Second thing, there's the travel logistics. Does it make sense for us? I mean, you have no real Pacific Coast presence. I know that Arizona, Arizona State, BYU are kind of in that. They're in the mountain-ish time zone. For people who don't know, Arizona is technically in 2 different time zones over the course of the year. They don't believe in daylight savings time over there. Anyway, I'm rambling. The point is, geographically, it's kind of isolated. Does it make sense? In the same way that did UConn make sense for them? It would create a 17-team league. That's another thing to consider. What does it mean for schedules? Does it mean for conference tournaments? According to Seth Davis, there is no interest in UConn. There is no interest in San Diego State. So do you stay at 17? 17 is just a weird number for all sports besides basketball. And I don't think they would go for all sports, but certainly basketball would be the big one. From the Gonzaga perspective, I'll say this. Again, if the report is out there that they are willing to take less money, this says to me that this is something they want. This might even be a conversation that they initiated. But does it make sense for them? And I think you have to look at it from one of 2 ways. I mean, one, there is the fundamental competitive perspective. And you can even look at that from one of 2 ways as well. On the one hand, they got it pretty good in the WCC. And I always think this is the one thing that never gets discussed in this realignment stuff, is the idea that, winning is really fun, right? Like, and we've talked about this so much, but it's great that you get all this extra TV money and all these extra games and all. It doesn't matter if you don't win, though. I mean, think about all the schools right now that are looking at Texas and Oklahoma coming to the SEC next year like, crap. Now, on top of beating Alabama and Georgia and Florida, Florida's not very good, but you get the point. We got to worry about Texas and Oklahoma too. Is that fun for a Mississippi State fan? Is that fun for an Arkansas fan? Is that fun for a Kentucky fan? I don't know. And for Gonzaga, you can criticize how they go about things, the conference that they play in, but it has set them up well. They get all the out-of-conference games that they want. They have, playing at Kentucky this year, UConn this year. I mean, they're playing mega games But then they get those 16 games in league play to really kind of reset and get focused for March. Now, you can argue it's hurt them, but you can argue it's helped them too, because they get great seeding, great pathways. Generally, they're in the Western, the Western region, so they're close to home. It makes sense. I think the counter to that is it also hasn't helped them win the ultimate big prize in March. And I think that's the question you got to ask is, one, first of all, this does stabilize the program. You don't have to worry about what if the 2 or 3 power conferences break off and everybody gets left behind. No, you're in the Big 12. You have the opportunity to play at the highest level. You don't have to worry about if 2 or 3 conferences break off, if there's an NCAA tournament only featuring power conference teams, any scenario, you're good to go. I do think there is an interesting perspective, though, to think about from Gonzaga's perspective as well. I think what's increasingly clear to me, and Gonzaga fans might get mad when I say this, but I believe it to be true. I think it is painfully obvious that the program has regressed since their lead assistant, Tommy Lloyd, left the program. I think most Gonzaga fans probably agree, but it's the truth. And so you go from about 2018 to 2022 or so, the year after Tommy Lloyd left. You have a team good enough to win the national championship every year. Then last year, you were kind of good. You were a 3 seed. You were okay, but you weren't great. Now coming into this year, this is probably Gonzaga's least talented team in probably close to a decade. This is probably the first Gonzaga team that I don't think has even a chance to win a national championship. And I think what's becoming increasingly clear is, remember that cool narrative about Mark? Oh, he doesn't like to recruit. He just likes to fly fish out on his lake in the stream behind his house. Well, I think it's coming back to bite them. And I do wonder, I think their days being at the top of the sport might be over. So stay in the WCC, beat up on a bunch of bad teams, get that auto bid, go to the NCAA tournament, and then from there you see if you can have success. You go to the Big 12, I'm sorry. Houston's out for blood. Kansas is out for blood. Arizona's out for blood. Iowa State's a tough place to play. Baylor's good every year. You're not getting 1 seeds. You might not be getting in some years, period. Like if you go back to last year, I'm sorry. Gonzaga, they probably were like the 4th. They would have been the 4th or 5th best team in the Big 12, and that was last year. This year, they're not as good. What are they going to look like next year? I don't know. So I could go on and on. But at the end of the day, I think the way that I look at this is pretty straightforward. The way that I look at this is that I think it's going to happen. I don't have a time frame. I don't know when. I don't know what. But when I hear that Gonzaga is willing to take less money, that says to me that it's pretty clear they want in. They're the ones that initiated the conversation. This is what they want. And I think if that's the case, I don't see why the Big 12 says no. I know they don't want basketball-only schools. I know 17 is a weird number, but when you can add one of the 5 biggest brands and they're coming in at a discount rate, I think it's tough to say no. I would guess that this does happen. Seth Davis's report says that it could be 2024. It could be 2025. I think this ends up happening, though. Thank you, everybody, for your support of the Aaron Torres Podcast YouTube channel. And we do have a major announcement as major news has come to the state of Kentucky. That is right. Legal sports betting now available in Kentucky. And here is the cool part. The Aaron Torres Pod YouTube channel has now partnered with DraftKings Sportsbook and the DraftKings Sportsbook app. And as a thank you to listeners of this channel, DraftKings Sportsbook has an incredible offer for all first-time customers. First-time customers, here's what you need to know. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Bet $5 on any game. You get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you use the code Torres. That's Torres, Torres. All you got to do, it's very simple. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook online. Bet $5 on any game. Get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you use the code Torres. First-time customers, take advantage of this exclusive offer. It's an incredible deal. Thank you to DraftKings. Could not be more fired up to be working with the DraftKings Sportsbook. All right, everybody. I'm back. Good to be back. I do want to switch gears, and I do briefly want to talk a little bit about the Colorado-Arizona State game on Saturday. And it was an interesting week at Colorado because really for the first time since probably, July, there was just really not a lot of buzz coming out of Boulder. And I think sometimes that's a good thing, right? I mean, it's great to have your program in the spotlight and College Game Day there and Big Noon Kickoff there and The Rock there and Lil Wayne there and Kevin Garnett there and Paul Pierce there. But at the same time, sometimes it's nice to not have as much noise, to block out the noise and to be able to focus on football. And so it was a little bit of a quieter week. It was a little bit of a quieter opponent, and it was certainly a tough game to find, right? It was on the Pac-12 network. None of us get it, whatever. I had an illegal stream. Don't tell anybody. It'll be our little secret. But at the same time, here's what stands out to me coming out of Saturday, Colorado, Arizona State. I assumed once the game went final, look, we're going to talk about it in some way, shape, or form. And when Colorado does get the 27-24 win, I sat there and said, wow, Colorado is 4-2. That is unbelievable. They've exceeded any logical expectation, for this year. That was exciting. That was fun. That was going to be the angle that I discussed coming out of this game. But then I heard what Coach Prime had to say after the game, and I was so blown away. I was so impressed that I think we need to discuss that instead. So let's get to it. Coach Prime went to the podium after a 27-24 victory, right? And this is a game, right? This was a team that won one game last year. This was a team that was picked to win 3.5 games this year. They improved to 4-2 on Saturday. Coach Prime gets his first win as a Pac-12 head coach. You'd think, in theory, that it is a time for a celebration, time to be excited, whatever. Instead, this is what Coach Prime had to say after the victory. Wonderful win, played like hot garbage. And I'm trying to figure this out. Sick of it. I really am. I'm sick of us coming out here and putting forth the effort that we put forth in the first half. We've had really diligent meetings, and we're trying really hard to figure this out because I'm sick of it. I'm sorry. I'm happy about the win, but I'm not happy in the fashion we won it. We're better than that. To which I say, I absolutely love everything about Coach Prime going to the podium and essentially ripping to shreds his team even after a victory. And I think in the process, this guy just busted a lot of myths about him that simply weren't true. Now, look, on the surface level, I get it, right? He's not the first coach to go to the podium after a victory and complain about his team's effort. He wasn't the only one on Saturday. Nick Saban, after they beat Texas A&M in an emotional game, he went to the podium. He was in a little bit of a better mood, but he said something to the effect of, all right, we got some really good stuff that came out of yesterday. It's some really bad stuff. Which do you want to talk about first? Or really good stuff from today, really bad stuff today? So Coach Prime's not the only one, and that's not going to make him a Hall of Famer and an all-time great because he's mad that his team won in ugly fashion on Saturday. But what I do think stood out is a couple things, is that I think it would be easy. It would be easy to lower the standard and to say, you know what? Everybody thought we were going to win 3.5 games. So our over-under was 3.5. Most people thought we were going under and we were going to win 3. And it would have been easy for him to come to the podium and say, I got my receipts, and all you guys told us that we were the worst team in the Pac-12. Well, we're 1-2 in the Pac-12. We could improve to 500 in the league come Friday against Stanford. Instead, what I love is, like I said, I think he did two very important things in the process of doing what he did when he came to the podium. And again, I get it. He's not the first coach to ever be frustrated after a win. But one, I do think he proved that any of these nonsense narratives about him are exactly that. And you know what the nonsense narratives are. That he's just a hype man. That he's not really a coach. That he's not really invested. He's going to leave for another job. He's going to leave for the NFL, even though we've already discussed a million times he's not going to the NFL. Well, he'll go to another college job. Well, he does. Colorado's a stepping stone. Well, he'll leave when his sons graduate and go to the NFL. Let me ask you a question. Did that sound like a coach that this is a 1 or 2 year stopgap for him? Or does that sound like a coach that is planning on being there for a while and is starting to set a standard? Again, he said, I'm trying to figure this out. Sick of it. I really am. I'm sick of us coming out here and putting forth the effort we put forth in the first half. We've had really diligent meetings and we're trying to figure this out because I'm sick of it. I'm sorry. That does not sound like a coach to me that's in it for the fun and the fame and the glory and a bunch of interviews with Fox and ESPN. That sounds like a coach that is trying to build a program. And what stands out to me about that, you know what stands out? It's that he is setting a standard for what is acceptable and what is not. And this is what all the great coaches are, right? Like, listen, I'm not going to start comparing him to this guy or that guy. But what is the famous saying of some of the famous coaches, right? Bill Belichick says this all the time. Nick Saban says it. The standard is the standard. And the standard isn't going 15-2 if you're Bill Belichick, which he's certainly not doing this year, but that's another conversation for another day. The standard for Nick Saban isn't winning the national championship. The standard is giving your best effort and your best foot forward every single day, every single week, every single game. That is the standard. That is the expectation. That was what Coach Prime was saying. Because it's interesting. This was a totally different message than even a week ago when Colorado lost to USC. He didn't come to the podium and rip his team against USC. I think he knew in his heart of hearts, his guys left everything on the field. They lost by 7 to the eventual Heisman Trophy winner, but they fought like crazy. They outscored him in the second half. And so I just bring it up because just think about the difference between last week and this week, and it speaks to who Coach Prime is. Last week, in defeat, saying, if you can't see us, the improvement that we're making, you are out of your mind. But then on the flip side, this week, yeah, we just won, but that is not acceptable. And so I love everything about it. And what I want to say beyond that is, to me, this is what I just said. I do believe this guy is at Colorado for the long haul, and I do believe he is building a program, that he's setting a standard. It goes back to some of the stuff I said even before he was hired, but certainly after he was hired at Colorado. If you go back to Jackson State, and he's talked a lot about this, he's talked about the fact that everything he's doing at Colorado, he did at Jackson State. There were just less people paying attention. Well, he did the same thing at Jackson State. He came in and said, a bunch of y'all guys aren't living up to expectations. You're letting yourself down. You're letting your family down. You're letting your teammates down. You got to go. And then after the first year, he did it again. And then by year 2, you started to see, okay, wait a second now. This isn't a joke. This isn't fun and games. It isn't about the cameras. It isn't about being coached by a Hall of Famer. It is a Hall of Famer coaching and a Hall of Famer who has a certain level of expectations. And then the last 2 years at Jackson State speak for themselves, 23-3 over the final 2 seasons. And so I just bring it up because it's so obvious that we are seeing this program being built in front of our eyes, but we are seeing the standard of excellence being set. Good enough is not good enough. A win is not good enough when you do not give your best effort. And I think we all know that Colorado didn't give their best effort. The cool part doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, guess what? They found a way to get a win. They found a way to improve to 4-2, and they play a very bad Stanford, this team, on Friday night at home. And I think they're going to 5-2 going into their bye. And so I just sit there and say, listen, this is a best of all world scenario. This program has completely exceeded expectations. By the way, I talked about this on Twitter on Saturday night. If you're not following me on Twitter, make sure to do so at Aaron_Torres. You can see my little handle down there on the screen. But why I bring it up is because when I look back at the conversation that we've had over the last couple of weeks, first of all, give Coach Prime credit. Not happy with the win, but at the end of the day, they're still 4-2. They're still 4-2. They've already surpassed the over-under season win total. And I still think the best is yet to come. I think they're going to win on Saturday or Friday night against Stanford. And then I think from there, they're going to win one of their final, whatever it would be, 5 games to get to bowl eligibility. Then you get all those extra practices. You get into recruiting, and you get to start building this thing out. And I'm telling you, man, I cannot wait to see what this program looks like a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever. Because as Coach Prime keeps saying, this is the worst we're ever going to be. You better get us now. But Colorado improving to 4-2 on Saturday. If you enjoyed this video, do me a favor. Make sure to hit the little subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. Also, follow me on social media, Instagram, Aaron Torres Pod on Instagram, Aaron_Torres on Twitter. Also, new episodes of the Aaron Torres podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.